Let's bring out our first guest. One of our favorite guests on the program here, Ty Hildenbrandt from the Solid Verbal College Football Podcast. Ty, it's always great having you on as we reach the culmination of the college football season. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite back.
We got to start with Indiana. I know there's an ACC team in the final. We'll get to the ACC team here in a moment. But what Curt Cignetti has done in such a short period of time with that program, can you compare it to anything that you've seen covering this sport for as long as you have?
The only means of comparison that I have is in the old days of playing the old NCAA video game where you would pick one of the worst franchises and then try to build it up. That's sort of what this is. The difference is that when we played that in college, it would take you a good 4 or 5 seasons to get to this point that they're at now. And Cignetti has done it in 2 years. So beyond that, no, I don't think so. I mean, we talk often about what it's going to take, specifically in the case of Miami, to like restore a fallen empire. And I feel like that's a conversation we're much more used to having around college football, but certainly no. You know, the question that we typically would get on our show is, hey, who's the next Boise State? Or, hey, who's the next, like, Oregon, or schools that have, like, established themselves as something of a winner in modern day college football. But to take a program like he has that has over 700 career losses in the history of the program and turn them into this now, the, I think, consensus number 1 team in the country, I don't know. There's a lot of pixie dust there for sure.
Is Indiana enough to hold him? Do you see him like having bigger goals at NFL, maybe at SEC school, anything like that?
Honestly, I think if he were going to bolt, this would have been the year to do it because there were so many big jobs that were available. And obviously he's kind of at like the top of whatever his stock value is, whether it be at Florida or Penn State, where he's a Western PA guy. There were plenty of opportunities to jump around and everybody was interested. The fact that he didn't go now, I think, is a pretty good tell that he's there to stay. And honestly, if he would leave to go anywhere at this point, it would probably be for the NFL. So my hunch is that he's going to be there for a while, and this is going to be a story that we see repeat itself over and over.
And along those lines, Ty, I mean, do you think he's just getting started? You know, they talked on the telecast last week about, that Indiana only has 8 4- and 5-star recruits, on their roster. And you look at the other teams in the Final Four and, they're all 40 plus with 4- and 5-star, former 4- and 5-star recruits. Given that he's been able to do it with lesser talent, quote unquote, and it seems like there's a lot of money now being pumped into that program, and Mark Cuban, is around the program and around the school again, and so on and so forth. Do you think he's just getting started? Is Indiana here to stay, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So they're definitely here to stay in terms of the transfer portal, because what we have seen now in, I guess this is the 3rd portal cycle for Cignetti at Indiana. The first one was a bunch of JMU guys, 13 James Madison players that came over with him. We obviously saw a bit of an uptick this last portal cycle with bringing in the likes of Fernando Mendoza and some guys that could help him out. What they are doing so far now in this latest iteration of the portal is like a top 10 portal class. So it seems like that is gradually ramping up as more and more is said and more people get the word about what Cignetti is building at Indiana. We haven't seen the high school recruiting tick up yet. My hunch is that is going to be next, but he is using this as sort of a fake it until you make it type of thing. By the way, they'll probably make it just fine on Monday night when they play Miami, and we've already seen them do a pretty good job throughout the course of this season in the playoffs. So I do not mean that as a pejorative towards Indiana, but clearly they are coming at this from a different perspective than, say, Alabama or Florida or Tennessee or any of the known brands in college football. Indiana is very much trying to rip this down and build it from the studs on up. So I think he's doing a really good job in the portal. Clearly the guy's proven that he can coach and he can do the little things, execution, discipline, culture, et cetera, et cetera. He can do all of that stuff really, really well. But I think the missing piece, before I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, they're absolutely positively here to stay, let's see where the high school recruiting goes over the next couple of years, and then maybe we could make a judgment call at that point.
I can't believe I'm about to ask this question, but if they beat Miami in the title game, do we have to talk about this particular team as one of the, I'm not saying the best, but one of the best in the last, I don't know, put a number on it, 30, 40 years in college football?
It certainly is one of the best, if not the best, stories of the last 30 or 40 years. In terms of their level of dominance, especially down the stretch. Most recently, we saw this from Ohio State a year ago. It did require them to lose to Michigan for that switch to flip, and then for them to go, and turn into like a modified version of their former self and rip through everyone in the playoff. But I think the closest means of comparison here would probably be 2019 LSU and their run of dominance that we saw with Joe Burrow through the playoff, winning their way, in dominant fashion. The difference here, though, is that Indiana's defense is demonstrably better than that LSU squad. I think where LSU had more top flight, first round caliber talent, Indiana's got a better defense and they play better as a team. So it's really hard to kind of find the appropriate comparison for what is going on, because I think on some level, at least for me personally, I'm distracted by the improbability of it all. Once you get past that to actually start comparing them to some teams in recent memory, it's hard because they are constructed a little bit differently. But the LSU one, I think, is probably as good as any.
No SEC team in the championship again. Are people overblowing the fact that the SEC has struggled the past couple of years? I know bowl games are tough to judge because of the opt-outs and whatnot, but is the SEC in trouble?
Define trouble, because the SEC is still a very, very deep conference with a bunch of good teams. But in terms of dominance, I think the era of SEC dominance is probably over. We saw, I think, a pretty dramatic shift with the combination of the transfer portal and NIL. And that seemingly robbed the SEC of some of its dominance right away. And we have seen that manifest now over the last 3 college football seasons. Clearly, there are plenty of teams in the SEC that can contend. But for sure, you look at what's gone on most recently in the postseason, how they've come up short relative to some of their Big Ten, and in this case, ACC counterparts. I definitely think the playing field has leveled to some extent. So to say they're in trouble is probably a stretch, but to say that there's a little bit more parity across the sport, I think that's 1,000% accurate.
What about the advantage this has for Miami and the ACC with the way that the ACC is now divvying out money? This is a huge windfall for them.
It is. And this is exactly what they were after, right? This is exactly what some of the bigger schools in the ACC were going for when they kind of modified their agreement. And, you got to get the job done. Ideally, you get the job done at home on Monday night against Indiana, who we've just been talking about here. That would be an added boon to that Miami program and the ACC as a whole. The ACC has taken on a lot of water over these last couple of years. And I think it would be a really cool story for an ACC team to, again, win the game at home, get a national championship for Mario Cristobal, certainly for the U getting back its old swagger. All of that stuff, I can't see a world in which that wouldn't be an awesome story and a great building block for the ACC moving forward.
So along those lines, Ty, I wanted to ask you that because, to Paulie's point, this would be great for Miami individually, right? If they win it and they get all this money that comes with it. For the ACC in general, though, does this make a difference for them moving forward? Do you think that, with Miami winning it, does it make it a more viable conference, in 10 years when the grant of rights runs out, that kind of thing? Do you think that this helps with the future stability of the ACC if Miami's able to get it done, or even just this run in general by Miami?
Future stability, no, because I do think that we're going to be at a spot in, 5-6 years where everything gets thrown in a blender again and everyone is chasing the bag, and we might see more conference realignment, and some of the squeakiest wheels in the ACC will be the ones that maybe are kicking the tires elsewhere. So I don't know if anything that happens on Monday changes that trajectory, but what I will say is think of where the conversation has been now these last couple of years, and it has very much been around not the viability of the ACC as like a long-term thing, but just the viability of the ACC as a conference that should be included and can contend with bigger brothers, right? The Big Ten and the SEC notably. If Miami were to go out there and win this thing, I think it absolutely is a proof of concept that, yes, there are good teams here too. It may not be as deep a conference as the Big Ten, as the SEC, maybe even as the Big 12, but certainly the highest of the high in this conference is good enough to compete with anybody. And I think that has a downstream effect on recruiting. It probably has a downstream effect on coaches, coaching talent, not just head coaches, but assistants that want to come and coach for ACC teams because these guys are trying to build their own profile. Right on through it. We see this with, as I'm sure you guys know well, in college basketball, right? A team goes to the Final Four, wins the national championships. It's not any great secret that enrollments or at least applications to that school tend to spike. So these types of things tend to have a real impact, maybe not so much in terms of what happens in the year of our Lord 2035, but in the short term, it can absolutely have a really positive effect, both for the school and I think for the conference.
You brought up the squeaky wheels. The two squeaky wheels are now watching Miami profit off of their what they wanted. What are those two teams in trouble with the ACC?
I think you're talking about Florida State and Clemson. Yeah, I have no idea what Florida State is doing right now. Absolutely none. I was looking at it yesterday. I went back and I looked at it last night. I have no idea what their portal strategy is. And so Mike Norvell's got a bit of a stay of execution right now. They decided they wanted to pour some money into the portal. I don't like the way they're using that money in the portal at all. So I'm not too optimistic about where things go from here. I guess we'll have to wait and see. They're going to have talent, but it just seems like it's more of the same, frankly. So that's I think troublesome. And on the Clemson side, I mean, the story over the last couple of years now with Dabo Swinney has been his inability to adapt. And that's not to say that Dabo needs to be out there bringing in 30 transfers a year or anything like that, but it just seems like whatever philosophy he is trying to impart upon this football team is not working in the way that it did before. So I would probably lean on the side of Clemson being in a little bit more trouble than Florida State, just because I really don't understand if there is a strategy to adapt at all. I think Mike Norvell and Florida State are trying, but I just don't know if he's good enough at doing it. So in a sense, I would say yes, are in trouble, but trouble in this case, I think means they're probably not viable playoff contenders for, the next year or two.
Ty, as long as we have you, just want to ask you a couple of Syracuse questions. What do you make of what the Orange has done in the transfer portal to this point, and your expectations for this team with Steve Angeli, again, theoretically back and healthy from that Achilles injury?
Yeah, I mean, so first and foremost, it's a tough schedule next year to my eye, and it's early, and, things are going to change between now and then, but they do have Clemson, they do have Louisville, they do have SMU, they do play Notre Dame. That game's at home. Who knows what you get out of Pitt or even North Carolina next year. So it's a bit of an uphill struggle in my view in terms of what they've got on the schedule. And Jelly coming back healthy, I mean, he was good before he got hurt. And so I think the combination of that with maybe not so much what they did in the transfer portal, but they definitely made a decided effort in high school recruiting to go out there and, load up on wide receivers. So I think they've got some young wide receivers coming in that look exciting to me. I also like the wide receiver they got from Penn State via the transfer portal. So I think they are doing about as good as you could expect right now. And Fran Brown clearly has a pretty good eye for talent. So I tend to trust that he will put a team out there that plays hard, goes whistle to whistle, and probably knocks off a couple of these teams here that appear to be on the 2026 slate. But until this thing is done and dusted, and we fully know who is in the portal, we fully know who has committed to Syracuse, and so on and so forth, is probably a bit premature.
One of those receivers you're talking about is going to be in a basketball uniform tonight
right
inside the Dome, taking on Florida State and Calvin Russell. High expectations. Syracuse fans are not used to 5 stars committing to their program. So the expectations are sky high for him, and I think the belief is that he's going to make an impact from day one on this football team next season. What would be a realistic expectation for somebody like Calvin Russell, for fans to have of Calvin Russell going into his freshman year at Syracuse?
Well, I mean, so let's put it this way. They've got I think, an idea now of what Steve Angeli brings to the table. And Steve Angeli, I thought, was pretty good in his time at Syracuse. Now, he needed some help around him, but big playmakers are not easy to come by. This guy, Calvin Russell, I believe, was the number 2 wide receiver in the class. As you mentioned, a 5-star. He's tall. He's a burner. He is from Miami, which is something probably to monitor if he has a really good freshman year. But knowing what we know of Fran Brown and how he likes to deploy this type of talent, I would expect that he's going to end up being a big play wide receiver, and they're going to try to target him. I think they're probably going to do everything they can to keep a guy like this in town, because all you need is a quarterback and a game-breaking wide receiver. If you can figure out the rest, great, but we've seen it all too often in college football. You just have a couple playmakers on the same side of the ball, and you could do some damage with that, especially in a conference like this in the ACC, which is still pretty gettable. So this is not me saying they're going to win the ACC or anything crazy like that, but it doesn't take all that much on the offensive side of the ball. You just need a few playmakers to make things interesting. So I would expect that they're going to target him, that they're going to use a lot of his services, and do whatever they can to retain him, provided it's a productive first season.
All right, well said, Ty. And lastly, you're very plugged into to Penn State football. Just wanted to get your thoughts on Matt Campbell going to Penn State and Kyle Whittingham, for that matter, going to Michigan.
Well, Campbell has brought the best of Iowa State with him, and so the roster next year for Penn State is going to be some hybrid of Iowa State, the best of what he was able to retain from Penn State, and a bunch of the coaches that he brought with him from Ames. So I'm optimistic that Penn State will be able to hit the ground running. I do think they're going to have more of an identity on offense. I'm not sure the offense will be better, but I do think it'll be more of an identity that fans can at least point to and say, that looks different than what we've been dealing with these last couple of years. So I'm optimistic. I think the schedule's a little bit easier next year than it's been. And I have, I think, pretty high hopes for what that team looks like in 2026. On the Michigan side, I'm going to take a wait and see approach. I think it was a big deal that they were able to retain the services of Bryce Underwood, but what that offense looks like, how Kyle Whittingham changes things around. I mean, if nothing more, they'll be, a good disciplined team that plays hard-nosed football. That's sort of been his brand. But as somebody who's never really coached on this side of the country, as somebody who is still sort of fighting against losing players right now, and I think trying to build this thing on the fly, given that he got the job pretty late, I'm not as optimistic right now about Whittingham as I would be about Campbell.
All right, Ty, we love having you on. Thanks so much for the insight. Enjoy the national championship game, and hopefully we'll talk again during the offseason.
Awesome. Let's do it, guys. Take care.
All right, you as well. Ty Hildenbrandt, Solid Verbal College Football Podcast, one of our favorite guests on the show.